trip to Valhalla Mountain Lodge, which is in interior BC, close to Nakusp. The end of February, I'll be doing a local trip out of Golden, just day touring Golden, which is a great location, actually. There's excellent day tours available within short driving distance of Golden, BC. I'll be doing March, I head up to northern British Columbia. Is everything okay, Maya? You look concerned.
I'm hearing you double. Okay, it's fixed. You were playing on another screen. Yes, sorry, continue.
Yeah, so then in March, I'll be heading up to the Burnie Glacier Chalet for 2 weeks. The end of March, I have another Golden-based day touring trip with actually some friends of Manrico's from Vancouver. And then in April, I've got another Bow-Yoho trip in early April. Towards the end of April, I have a trip up to Selkirk Lodge again. Kind of cool to be doing a trip to Selkirk Lodge in both January and April, 2 totally different seasons. January early, it'll be short days, cold, clear weather, most likely lots of low density powder, and in April, it'll be more spring skiing conditions up on the high glaciers. So 2 totally different trips based at the same lodge. And then the end of April, I fly to Norway and head up to Svalbard, and I do 3 weeks of skiing out of the sailboat with my ski and sail trips at Svalbard. Do that for a month. And then I'm back home at the end of May to rest the legs for a little bit.
For a few weeks, and then go back at it again.
Back at it again, yeah.
Well, it sounds really exciting.
Yeah, and yourself, it sounds like rock climbing season is wrapped up in Croatia.
Yes, I don't have any plans still in place.
Yeah.
For traveling, but I actually am really looking forward to. There is one great webinar that we did, and it's about sailing and climbing trip in Sardinia.
Oh, awesome.
So that one is on my list, and it looks so amazing. It's right after the summer, and it looks really phenomenal. And like I said, I've never been to Italy, and I'd love to make something like that for myself. So
that's in September.
Yes, September, October.
Oh, cool.
October is also, you can get really a great few weeks of being on a beach, swimming still. The summer is not over sometimes, and actually very often in October. There is this transition, and it's like within a week, summer is over and autumn is there.
Yeah. A few years ago, I was actually swimming in the Adriatic Sea on the 25th of October. It was warm and beautiful, and 2 days later, it felt like winter was on its. Or 2 days later, it felt like winter was on its way.
Okay, so we're actually right at 1 p.m. Eastern. So let's officially start. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining today. It's wonderful to see you all here. We are now at around 60 people joining us. So thank you all for joining. My name is Maya. I'm part of the 57 Hours team, and I'm in charge of delivering great webinars such as this one today. If this is your first time hearing of us, we are an online platform that connects people with certified guides for outdoor adventures. And today we are presenting yet another one of our epic adventure webinars, this time in partnership with Backcountry Skiing Canada. And your hosts for the hour are IFMGA mountain guide Tom Wolfe and his former adventure participant Manrico Skirmin. They will introduce 2 brilliant stars of Waputik snowy constellation, the Wapta Traverse and the Bow-Yoho Traverse. So why are these trips worth taking? Why are they so awesome? You'll hear just in a minute. Please use the chat, connect with one another, and we'll also have a Q&A session at the end of the webinar where you can ask anything you want to know about backcountry skiing in the Canadian Rockies or in general, really. So please ask your questions. You can use the Q&A section of Zoom, which is on the bottom of your screen. You'll see a little icon. So leave your questions there and we will collect them to answer after the presentation. So let's get started with the reason why we are all here, which is to talk about hut-to-hut ski traverses. And I'll let Tom tell you a little bit more about himself, but our host for the hour has a wealth of knowledge to share, we're really lucky that he is joining us today. So without further ado, Tom, the stage is yours.
Great. Thank you very much, Maya. Can everybody see the opening slide? Everything's good to go?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you for the introduction. As Maya mentioned, I'm a mountain guide, IFMGA mountain guide. I've been living in Canmore, Alberta for close to 30 years. It's where I make my home. I've been guiding since 1995, and over the past 10 years, I've been focusing almost exclusively on ski touring. Our ski touring season is long. I start guiding in November and usually wrap it up at the end of May or beginning of June. I did some heli ski guiding in BC for about 10 years, but really my heart has always been as a mountain guide in small groups, being up in the mountains, being intimately connected with the mountains and away from the noise and buzz of civilization. And so I haven't heli skied for close to 10 years, and I've got no regrets. I'm pretty happy with the touring lifestyle. So today I'd like to feature 2 hut trips in the Canadian Rockies. These trips are really close to my heart. For one thing, my first trip to the Canadian Rockies was in the winter of 1988-89, and it was a guided trip up onto the Wapta Icefield. We stayed at the newly constructed Bow hut. And when I look back on it now, I see that this week-long trip was actually a turning point in my life. It was the start of my keen interest in ski touring. It was the start of my interest in the Rocky Mountains, and actually as my life as a mountain guide. Here's a funny anecdote from that very same trip. Seems like a long time ago, but when I close my eyes, I can put myself back in time and picture the Bow hut. At that time, there were many ski mountaineers. They still used essentially beefy cross-country skis with metal edges and telemark bindings. The skis were built to travel. Actually, the first time I skied with Manrico, he was skiing on telemark skis as well. They're very, very versatile skis. They excel at covering distance. But especially the early skis, they weren't all that great at going downhill. They were long, they were double cambered. And as we traveled up the canyon towards the hut, we noticed there was a party ahead of us, and they had even skinnier skis. When we pulled into the hut, which is actually the same building that stands there today, it had just been constructed a couple of months before, we discovered that there was a party of 3 that had beaten us there. They'd made the trek with skinny cross-country skis, the kind that you'd see at Nordic ski races. To this day, I've got no idea what they were thinking, but I do know that they had to have had a lot of perseverance and stamina. It's been decades since I've seen anyone on the Wapta with gear that light. Today, most everyone uses alpine touring skis. Even Manrico has started to switch. He uses them occasionally, maybe more and more these days. At least 100 millimeters underfoot. They provide excellent downhill skiing performance, and they're so light that actually it makes the up and the travel not that bad at all. So what are we going to be talking about today? Well, first of all, why the Rockies? The Canadian Rockies is a great place to ski. A lot of people think of the mountains in Western Canada as all being the Rockies, but in fact, we have 3 great ranges. One is the range that Manrico lives in, which is the Coast Mountain Range. It's an unbelievable, beautiful mountain range with stupendous granite peaks and big, big glaciers and a lot of precip. That's the same range that Whistler, the famous ski resort, is located in. Then you have the Columbia Mountains, which consists of a series of different smaller ranges, such as the Kootenays, the Purcells, the Monachees, and the Selkirks. That's the Columbia Mountains. And then you have the Rocky Mountains. The Rocky Mountains begin way down in the United States and reach all the way up into the Yukon ranges. So we're going to talk about the Alpine Club or the Canadian Alpine Club of Canada ski huts. They play a very dominant role in ski touring and mountaineering here in the Rockies for reasons I'll explain in a moment. How to get to the huts, what a typical week on a hut-to-hut ski traverse looks like. Then we'll shift and we'll get an idea from Enrico of what his experience with one of my trips was like. He's got a very interesting perspective as somebody who has decades of his own personal unguided experience under his belt. And then we'll switch back to me. I'll talk about the gear that you'll need, the preparation that you'll want to undergo to get ready for these trips, as well as some logistical details, and talk about the 2 different trips that I'm offering this coming winter. And then we'll finish off with a question and answer session. So feel free, even as I talk here over the next half an hour or so, feel free to use the chat line. Maya will check out the questions that you might have, and she'll either interrupt me and hit me with those questions on the fly, or we'll save them for the Q&A session at the end. So, most of Canada's most famous ski terrain is in the Columbia Mountains, the Selkirks, the Montachis, the Purcells, the Kootenays. Why is that? Well, I think well, first of all, they have amazing snow, but it's also largely because of the commercialization of that terrain with heli skiing and private backcountry ski lodges. In short, access to ski terrain throughout BC is excellent. The Canadian Rockies, on the other hand, tends to get overlooked. Why is that? Well, there's a lot of reasons, but I think the biggest one is that the vast majority of the Canadian Rockies ski terrain is actually hard to get to and located in protected national and provincial parks, and you don't have the same commercialization going on. It's actually quite challenging to run commercial guided ski trips in the national parks, largely because of access. Fortunately, there is an outstanding and affordable hut system, and it's managed by the Alpine Club of Canada. So it's widely recognized that BC has the world's best powder skiing. Why is that? Well, first of all, we have good access to exceptional terrain, but equally important to terrain is our snowpack. Begins in September. Cool, moisture-laden clouds stack up along the west edge of BC's mountain ranges. Snow starts piling up as clouds are forced up and over the crests of the 3,000 meter and higher elevations, starting with the Coast Range, who always get the most, and trending further east across the ranges. Major storm tracks help to funnel the powder. Another key to the quality of the snow is the proximity to the colder, drier areas near the Rocky Mountain Trench. The Columbia Mountains, such as the Selkirks, really enjoy that, as do the western ranges of the Rockies. In that area, you get more sun and lighter powder than in the western portions of the province, which tend to receive warmer weather and even a little bit of rain throughout the winter. The Canadian Rockies actually has some of the most spectacular ski touring in the world. Not to say that other places don't have beautiful terrain either, but the Canadian Rockies is right up there with the best. Here's a glimpse of the entrance to an ice cave below the Ferris Glacier, actually last December. This December. This is crossing the Waputik Icefield in November. There's a saying here in Canada that we've got 8 months of winter and 4 months of bad skiing. Well, that might be an exaggeration, but high on the spine of the Rockies, it's not far off. Of course, skiers come from the far corners of the earth for the down, and certainly we have that. This is located near the south exit of the Bow-Yoho Traverse as we're descending into Emerald Lake, a stupendous run of about 1,000 meters. Here's a shot of spring skiing high above Bow Lake on Mount Jimmy Simpson. Here's an early winter run down into the creek that approaches the Bow Hut, the first overnight stay on the Bow-Yoho Traverse. So you'll see we do have a little bit of tree skiing as well, even up on the Wapta. The Wapta zone is famous for its rugged high alpine scenery and its glaciated ski runs, but there is just enough great tree skiing to provide for options during stormy weather. So I thought I'd touch a little bit now on the location and the history of the Wapta Icefield. Here's a nice map of Canada and the US, and you can see that the location of the Waputik Icefield is roughly in the center of Western Canada. It's conveniently located about a 2-hour drive from Calgary's International Airport. Our staging is going to be out of Field, BC this year, which is just west of the Alberta-British Columbia border. So here's an overview of the two traverses that I'm going to be talking about today. They roughly parallel each other. The start of the Bow-Yoho Traverse is at Bow Lake, and it heads, first of all, roughly in a westerly direction before trending south. The Wapta, on the other hand, starts up at Pito Lake and trends in a fairly relentless southerly direction to its exit at Sherbrooke Lake, just a little east of the exit for the Bow-Yoho and very close to Field, BC. Both are about a 15-minute drive from Field. So here's a satellite map from Google Earth, and you can see these blue little teardrop icons are the locations of kind of key points along the Wapta Traverse. And this is a picture from the summertime, and it gives you an idea of how heavily glaciated the area is. So the first recorded exploration into the Wapta ice fields was actually a long time ago. It was in 1932 by McCubry and the Neve brothers and Secord. But it wasn't until Hans Gemoser attempted a traverse from Kicking Horse Pass to Jasper in 1960 that skiing on the glaciers became popular among the local mountaineering community. The first hut was actually the Balfour hut, right in the middle of the Wapta. But the first huts had to be replaced by stronger huts later on in short order, as wandering wolverines would often break in and eventually destroy them. So the Rockies Alpine Club of Canada huts allow access to a wide range of different world-class ski touring. We've got peak bagging up on high glaciated peaks. We've got ski mountaineering on big glaciers, often rugged with seracs and ice cliffs. We've got skiing in alpine bowls. We've got beautiful circuit tours out of the huts, and we've got even a little bit of storm skiing whenever it's too cloudy to get up high. Each week, of course, is unique, and each day and every run responds to the rhythm of the weather and the incoming and outgoing storms. Sometimes we battle our way to the next hut, as we did with Manrico and his group a few years ago, as the Alpine is raging with storm snow. And I guess I leave that there, sorry. And other days we get up high into the high Alpine and ski steeps under blue skies with impunity. Some weeks or even days are a blend of both. I'm going to run through a handful of slides that show you what a Canadian Rockies ski traverse looks like. So Pito Hut is the first hut in the Wapta Traverse, starting at the famous Pito Lake, which is a very popular lake that's, you'll see it on Instagram, hundreds of tourists photograph it every day. Start there, and it's a pretty big day to get up to the hut. It's about 12 kilometers. And takes about 6 hours, but it's made much easier by the fact that porters will bring our heavy food load up to the hut in advance. So from Pito, it's a short tour across to Bow Hut. This is a picture of Bow Hut. It's quite a large, spacious hut. On our way to the hut, there's usually time to bag a peak or two en route, such as Mount Hable or Mount Rhonda. Like all the Wapta huts, with the exception of the Stanley Mitchell, Bow Hut is an alpine hut located at an elevation of about 2,350 meters, 7,700 feet, on the eastern edge of the Waputik Icefield in Banff National Park. You can actually look down from the hut and see the highway. It's the largest, best equipped, and most accessible of the 4 alpine huts in the Waputik Icefield, and it serves as the base for a wide variety of ski tours and mountaineering ascents to half a dozen peaks in the Wapta. It's the easiest and safest starting point for the Wapta Traverse, and Balfour Hut, the next hut on the Traverse, can easily be reached from it in a day with time to bag a peak on the way. This is looking back on the Bow Hut, and in the distance is Crowfoot Peak. Crowfoot Peak is actually a great place to go when it's storming. It's a little bit further east than the main range of the Waputik Icefield, and it's easily accessed from Bow Hut. And I've fairly often sought refuge there for some decent skiing and even a little bit of tree skiing near the bottom when the weather's raging up high. It tends to get a lot less wind and hold some pretty good snow even when it's blowing hard. Here's the spacious common area of the Bow Hut. Our group this winter will have exclusive use of all the huts. So we won't be sharing it with other users this winter. There's a number of reasons for that. First of all, it's a great way to go. It's nice to have the place all to ourselves. And secondly, this year, the Alpine Club has decided, to make, because of COVID, to make exclusive bookings only. Here's the view out of the dormitory. It's second to none. This is looking out at the north face of Vulture Peak. Very spectacular place to spend a day or two. So, especially later in the season, early starts might be necessary to beat the heat. This is heading out of Bow Hut before dawn to get across to Guy Hut in good time. The final push to Guy Hut involves an airy traverse along a ridge before dropping down a steep slope to the most modern hut in the Canadian Rockies, the Guy Hut. Actually, it's called the Richard and Louise Guy Hut. This photo was actually taken on December 30th, which shows that spring isn't the only time to enjoy this amazing area. This is scrambling above isolated col en route to the Stanley Mitchell Hut. You know, the ultimate ski touring day, in my view, means getting up high onto the glaciers and pushing up for the peaks. This is Isolated Peak, which sits right between Guy, the Yoho Glacier, the Des Poilus Glacier, and the Little Yoho Valley. And it's actually, when you're there, it doesn't seem like anything spectacular, but you get a great view of it from the highway, and it looks pretty impressive. And it also makes a great ski touring peak as well. For the real keeners, as I mentioned, there's sometimes opportunity to bag really impressive peaks that require some exposed boot packing. This is Mount St. Nicholas, and unfortunately, it cuts off the very top, but it's a very sharp, jagged summit. It's not actually as steep or as intimidating as it looks from the other side. It's actually a very nice boot pack to get to the top, and a really stunning peak to bag on the Wapta Traverse between Bow and Balfour Huts. Here's a peak that's easily accessible from either Pito Hut or Bow Hut. It's an example of one of the many really stunning glaciated runs that we have. This is the lower reaches of Mount Hable, easily attained while you're traveling from Pito to Bow, or as a day trip from the Bow Hut. So it's not all glaciated runs. We do have quite a bit of ski touring. This is the run down from Hot Dog Lake, which is one of the storm skiing options from the Bow Hut. This is Louise and Richard Guy Hut. It again has, surprisingly enough, even though it's one of the highest huts on the traverse of the Bow-Yoho Traverse, it actually has a 600-meter tree run, just a short distance from its front door. The Guy Hut incorporates many technologies intended to reduce its carbon footprint and increase the longevity of the facility. It's the newest of the huts, but it's also has this really very comfortable, cozy, airy feel about it. The hut runs on solar, wind, and propane power. The solar and wind energy is stored in a bank of batteries that power the lighting, the fans, and the control room. The stoves and heating are propane powered. And while there are propane lights, we tend to use the electrical lighting as much as possible to conserve propane, which has to be flown to a site. Here's again looking back at the Balfour Hut. It's looking towards the Balfour Hut as we approach it from the Bow Hut. And in the distance, you can see the lower, heavily crevassed and seracked reaches of Balfour Peak. Very impressive peak that looms over the hut. And this is the front entrance to the Balfour Hut. The original location of the very first hut on the Wapta, although this is the third generation. The original fiberglass igloo was built in 1965, a long time ago, 55 years ago at Balfour Pass in Banff National Park. And it was construction was undertaken by the Alpine Club of Canada and the Calgary Ski Club. It survived until 1971 and was disassembled and reassembled entirely with Swiss Army knives. It has has an interesting history in that as it was being airlifted by helicopter, it was inadvertently dropped onto a glacial moraine and the pieces were put back together. Eventually, it was marauding bands of wolverines that destroyed it. The second Balfour Hut was constructed in 1971, built of cedar logs on the south side of Mount Olive to the west of the Continental Divide in Yoho National Park, and it too succumbed to wolverines after lasting for 18 years. And as I mentioned earlier in this slideshow, in 1989, the current metal hut was built at a new location in Banff National Park, just in time for my first visit as a 19-year-old, and it was located at the toe of the Vulture Glacier. It's a fantastic location. And interestingly, it's painted dark blue. It used to be painted a lighter kind of a tan color, and then they've been switching the colors of all these huts to dark blue. I wonder if anybody can guess why. It's because it's really easy to see in a whiteout. This is the color that they used to be, kind of a tan color. And for whatever reason, in a whiteout, it's really hard to see these buildings. The very first time that I ever went to the Neil Colgan hut, this is the Neil Colgan hut. It's a tiny shoebox-sized hut on the south end of the Wapta Traverse. Uses a bivvy shelter between Balfour and the highway. The very first time I ever went to this hut was with my wife and our friend Judith. And I was fairly young and new to the whole ski touring thing, and I was a little bit concerned that we'd have trouble finding the hut. And this was before GPSs really became popular. I had just heard of GPSs. This is would have been in the late 1990s. I had just heard about, it would have been in the early 1990s. Just heard about GPSs, but they were very, very uncommon and big and unwieldy. And so as we were trekking towards up and over the Balfour High Call, it clouded in and became very, very hard to see. And we got down to the toe of the Vulture Glacier and we couldn't see a thing. It was completely white. And I had my map out, and I had my compass, and I would walk forward and I'd bump up against this big wall of snow. And I'm like, well, I'm sure it's got to be right here, but there's this almost vertical wall of snow here. Where could it possibly be? Well, we'd anticipated this as a possible eventuality, and so we bought a tiny little tent and a couple of little sleeping pads. So the three of us squeezed into a two-man tent. And then in the morning, my wife had to get out and go pee. And she says, "Tom, there it is." And she took a quick compass bearing of it, and then it clouded in again. We couldn't see anything. And so we got out, and this time we were a bit, felt a little bit confident we'd find this thing. So we got it, we followed the compass bearing, boom, there was this big wall of snow. What's going on? There's this wall of snow. Well, if you can't go over it, maybe you can go around it. So we went to the left, and we found a little ramp that led up, and there after all of this was the Neil Colgan hut. Today, with a GPS, you just look at where the waypoint is and you walk towards it. You hit a wall of snow, you go around it. It's a piece of cake these days. But every time I walk to the Neil Colgan hut, especially when it's a way out, I remember that first experience of trying to find it in the white. And I'm very glad that we don't have to do that anymore with GPSs. This is an early morning start to beat the heat for the exit to Sherbrooke Lake. This is right almost exactly where we pitched our little tent, approaching Mount Niles. The really impressive face of Mount Niles. You can just see the light of early dawn starting to shine on it. The reason for such an early start is there's some steep south-facing or east-facing slopes that you have to negotiate to get out to Sherbrooke Creek. And especially in April, you want to beat the heat as well as get people back to the road in time to catch flights home on Friday afternoon. Switching back to the Bow-Yoho Glacier, this is the spectacular vertical face of the toe of the Des Poilus Glacier, en route to the Stanley Mitchell hut. This is on December 31st, actually New Year's of a few years ago. Very, very cold, but it was a hardy band of Saskatchewaners who were very adapted to the cold. This is at the top of Isolated Col looking back, and you can see right here, you can see our track coming away from that very toe that we just looked at in the previous slide. It's a really impressive sight. However, whenever I'm there, I feel a little bit sad because my first time ever skiing down that glacier, the glacier reached way down to here, and it's just been melting back steadily ever since. So this lake that's below the glacier didn't used to exist. The ice face never used to exist. It is sad to see the glaciers rapidly, especially in recent years, rapidly diminishing from their former grandeur. This is descending from Isolated Col. Up here you can see just the lower reaches of the summit horn of Isolated Peak. This is just at tree line above the Stanley Mitchell hut. And this is the beautiful, warm, inviting Stanley Mitchell hut, the lowest of the Alpine Club huts in the Wapta area at an elevation of 2,060 meters or 6,750 feet. It's the Alpine clubs, the club huts that really make Canada's great haute routes possible. This is a group right in front of Stanley Mitchell. There you can see Manrico in the green with his group of Alpine Club comrades from the Vancouver section at the tail end of the Bow-Yoho Traverse. The Wapta and Bow-Yoho Traverses provide superb between 4 and 7 day trips with high alpine peak bagging and great ski runs. They include great tree skiing, and they're located along the spine of the Rocky Mountains. Interesting detail about the Stanley Mitchell hut is that it was used as a base for mountain guide Hans Gemoser, who I mentioned earlier, his 1960s ski camps, just before he opened the world's first heli ski lodge. This is the light of the full moon, and when you get nights like this, it's pretty incredible. You can actually ski tour and walk around without a headlamp or without a light of any sort. This is peeking into the cozy, wood fire warmed interior of the Stanley Mitchell hut. I just wanted to close it off with a couple of slides of some of the great skiing. These are traverses. We are moving from hut to hut, but the whole purpose is for the down. This is a picture of Christian skiing down the slopes of Mount Jimmy Simpson, just above the Bow hut. And this is a repeat of a slide we saw earlier, which is skiing down from Hot Dog Lake into the creek that ascends to Bow hut. So as I mentioned, we're offering 2 hut-to-hut traverses. They are both in the same area, but they are of, I would say, a significantly different nature. So the Wapta Traverse, it's the original Rockies hut-to-hut traverse. What I love about this traverse is that it covers some amazing terrain with some of the most spectacular, rugged alpine scenery around, such as this shot of the approach to the Balfour High Col. There are some good skiing opportunities too, but we tend to do those as we're traveling from a hut to hut, and the itinerary is more focused on travel than it is on downhill skiing. So the highlight of the trip Highlights of the trip are that it's about 28 miles or 45 kilometers long. It involves 5 days of touring in total. The total elevation gain for the whole trip over 5 days is 6,000 feet or 1,800 meters, which doesn't sound like a lot, but that doesn't include the side trips. The side trips are in addition to that vertical. And there's just spectacular scenery. Every day is a travel day. You're moving around, you're seeing lots of beautiful country. Here's a kind of a nice little map outline of the trip. It starts off at the Pito Lake and works its way south. The first hut is a Pito Hut. And the next one is a short day across to Bow Hut, where we climb Mount Hable on the way, or maybe Mount Rhonda or Mount Thompson. We spend one night in the Wapta, in the Bow Hut. We continue south towards the Balfour Hut, climbing perhaps Mount St. Nicholas or Mount Olive on the way, or even Mount Gordon if the weather's fine. From the Balfour Hut, we make our way up and over the Balfour High Call, which is the major crux of the trip, and down into the Scott Duncan Hut, down the Vulture Glacier, either through Vulture Call, I've got my zones wrong. Up and over the High Balfour Call, down into the Scott Duncan Hut, and from Scott Duncan Hut, we make our way under the east face of Mount Niles, down to the exit at the road at Sherbrooke Lake Trailhead. The other traverse I'm offering is a total of 7 days. That I say plus here, but what I mean is it includes 3 days of trips out of the huts. So it's a seven days of touring in total. It's 32 miles long, or 51 kilometers, so roughly the same length and roughly the same elevation gain, not including the 3-day trips. So you can count on the 3-day trips adding another 4,000 or 5,000 meters of elevation, which is at least 12,000 feet. If we have conditions that are good for that, and I would say that the highlight of this trip is that it is a traverse, but you have 3 days of awesome ski mountaineering that you can do en route out of the 3 different huts. So a brief overview with this map of the Bow-Yoho Traverse. You start at Bow Lake. It's a short trip up to the Bow Hut. Once we get to the Bow Hut, we usually have the afternoon to bag a peak such as Mount Gordon, and do a ski run down the front side, the north side of Mount Gordon. Then the next day, we would do some peak bagging up onto Mount Hable or Mount Rhonda or Gordon, or Mount St. Nick or Mount Olive. There's a whole bunch of different peaks that you can access from the Bow Hut. So we spend 2 nights at the Bow Hut. Then we work our way across to the Guy Hut. If you have great weather, as we did this past spring, on the way to the Guy Hut, we can bag peaks such as Mount Rhonda, or Mount Collie, which is has a beautiful steep south face on it. Very high elevation, so even in April we had low density powder on it. The Guy Hut, once we pull into the Guy Hut, if people still have the legs for it, there's the north face of Yoho Peak, which is a short, it actually takes about 20 or 30 minutes to get to the summit of Yoho Peak from the hut. And then you have a beautiful short 200 or 300 meter ski run down the north side of Yoho Peak. And then the next day, this is often kind of the crowning jewel of the trip. If we have the weather for it, we can actually make our way up Mount Des Poilus, which is a very impressive peak with a very steep southeast face, or some of the sub peaks if the conditions aren't quite as good. And the next day is spent working our way up and over Isolated Call towards the Stanley Mitchell Hut. That's usually a pretty big day. We don't have a lot of time for side trips, but in the evening we can do some tree skiing off the north-facing flanks of it's called the Vice President in the trees. That also makes a great storm skiing destination. I've often used that area. It's got great tree skiing when storms are raging. If, however, you wake up to beautiful blue skies and the conditions are good, you can make your way up to the President and the Vice President, and there's a stupendous north-facing glaciated run down the front side of that, or up into the Mount MacArthur or isolated peak zones. Our last day, day 8, is spent working our way down. It's a long road. It's about 23-kilometer, fairly flat section down to the highway and the parking lot. If you get perfect conditions in the right group, there's also some alternates that bring you down into Emerald Lake, which is a pretty amazing way to finish, but only in if you have the perfect conditions. Well, now I would like to hand it over to Manrico. So Manrico's just going to have to steal my screen share here. And Manrico, as I mentioned, joined me for a Bow-Yoho trip 3 years ago, and I'm really pleased to have him share his perspective because it's quite a unique one.
Okay, Tom, I'm getting a message that you have to stop screen sharing.
Oh yeah, no problem.
Yeah, okay.
Perfect.
Thank you, Tom. So this is a photo of Liz and myself. I'm the one on the right, and it's at the base of the Des Peloux Glacier below the Guy Hut. I just want to give you a little background on my particular experience. I've been doing backcountry skiing since the late 70s and multi-day traverses since the mid 80s. I did the Wapta traverse in 1990 with Liz, and also done trips in Baffin Island, the Yukon, and Alaska. My longest traverse was 19 days, where we skied around most of Mount Logan, which is the highest mountain in Canada. All of those trips were unguided. I know this is a guiding presentation here, but I'll tell you, all of those trips were unguided, and most of them were actually on telemark skis. So I consider myself to be pretty well experienced in backcountry skiing. I'm not a professional, I'm not a guide, but I consider myself to be very experienced. In 2018, some friends from the Alpine Club organized a trip to do the Bow-Yoho Traverse, which had been on my list for a while. And they said it was guided with this fellow, Tom Wolfe, who they've done trips with before. And I thought, oh, well, okay, I've never done a guided trip before, but I'm willing to give it a try. Why not? And so we went. This is at the Bow Lake parking lot where we met. Tom is second from the right. I knew just about everyone on the trip, except for Tom and one other person. And Tom was very efficient in looking at all our gear, making sure we had all the right stuff, and sorting out a bit of communal gear that had to be shared. And off we went. And just by way of background here, the person on the left, if you look just above his head and slightly to the right, that's the location of the Bow Hut. So I think it took something like 3 hours to get there, ski across Bow Lake and then up a little hill to get to the Bow Hut. So this is actually on day 3 when we're making our way over to the Guy Hut, and I realized one of the really good reasons to have a guide actually is that they do all the trail breaking, which was certainly a novelty for me. I was used to splitting the trail breaking duties, and having a guide do all the trail breaking was actually pretty nice. I thought, well, I could get used to that. Another good reason to have a guide was the route finding. The route finding to get to the Guy Hut, which you see in the center of the photo there, it's actually a little tricky. And in some cases, especially in bad weather, it can be very tricky. Even with the GPS, you can follow a track, but the terrain is very complex, and you can easily get yourself into trouble. And so here's one situation where a guide actually really helps. And so in this section, we could have made it ourselves, but I can see where a guide would be very, very useful. Another good reason for having a guide is that you eat well. This is breakfast, which with pancakes, bacon, I'm not quite sure what else is there, but blueberries. Pretty nice breakfast. If we were doing our own food, it would be a measly bowl of granola. So it was nice to be treated to nice breakfasts and dinners and lunches every day. Tom did all the organizing of the food. It's another photo of a difficult portion of the trip. In this particular case, the light was super flat here. It was like skiing along the inside of a ping pong ball, it was really hard to tell which way was up and down in front of your skis. And it was actually quite dangerous, and because you could easily walk into a hole or off the edge of a little cliff or something. I know that seems strange, but those of you who've done a lot of skiing know what I'm talking about with the flat light. And here I learned a neat technique from Tom, who's in front here, of course. And you see that he's got a length of cord tied to the end of his ski pole. And what he was doing was he was flicking the cord forward, so the cord would always be ahead of him, and he could tell from that whether he was going to walk over a cliff or into a hole. It was actually, it was really that bad that he had to use that technique to for us to move along. Very, very useful. And this is actually down in the woods on the exit road below the Stanley Mitchell hut. And I threw this photo in because you almost never see photos of, or you almost never see wildlife on trips like this. And I thought, oh, here's this ptarmigan that's trying to hide. And in fact, it would have been he would have been able to hide from us, except that his tracks gave us away. So I stopped and watched him for a few minutes, kept me entertained. And here we are close to the end. A little picture of Tom. He's very happy. And I have to say quite honestly here that Tom is a really personable guy. I mean, I don't think I've ever met someone quite so happy on throughout the whole trip. It was great being with him. And since that trip, which again was my very first guided trip after many years of backcountry skiing, I've done a couple of other trips with Tom, and I'm looking forward to doing another one with him in March. So back to you, Tom.
Well, thank you, Manrico. Appreciate the kind words.
Totally unsolicited.
Totally unsolicited. Yeah, great. George Jackson, I just saw a chat pop up from George Jackson. Nice to hear see your voice. I guess you'd call that about a chat text. George was on a trip with me a couple years ago. Okay, so I just have to fast forward here past Manrico's slides. Okay, next up is how to prepare for this multi-day ski touring trip. There's kind of a couple different categories. I get a lot of questions from people that say, can I do it? And I assume that they're meaning, do they have the skills and the fitness for that? I would say that the most important thing is that you know how to ski. Given that you know how to ski, the next step is skiing can take most people years to figure out. So if you can ski, that's an important first step. And then the next is fitness. It's really hard to say how you should train fitness-wise for these trips, but I do have a few ideas and tips. I would say that in general, touring experience is not important for these trips. I've had a lot of people show up with minimal to even no touring experience, and they do just fine because they know how to ski and because they're fit. Especially with these traverses, the transitions are very limited. We might only have 1 or 2 transitions in a day, or even none. And the travel days are typically reasonable and not too technically demanding at all. So what does a typical day look like? On a typical ski day, that's where I'm sorry, I got this backwards, and I noticed that earlier and I forgot to change it. I've got these switched. So on a typical travel day, we alternate between 6 to 10 kilometers of travel, 500 to 700 meters of elevation, and we're carrying a mid-sized pack, and ski days. So we'll be traveling on a ski day quite a bit longer of a distance, often 10 or 15 kilometers, and our elevation gain will be quite a bit more, between 1,000 and 1,400 meters. But the advantage is that we're going to have a lightened day pack. A lot of people are concerned that they might not keep up that pace day after day. So on the Wapta Traverse, the trips between the huts tend to be shorter, and then we fill in the days or the afternoons with side trips. On the Bow-Yoho traverse, we alternate between travel days and ski days. So the solution, in my opinion, would be to take a strategic rest day and enjoy the comforts of the huts to recharge, whether it be hanging out for a nap, reading a book, or just kicking back and enjoying the scenery. In terms of ski level, you should be at least a strong intermediate skier or to an advanced skier or split boarder. So what does a strong intermediate skier mean? So you have to be able to safely get down any kind of snow. And by any kind of snow, I'm talking not just, nice easy powder or hard pack, but I'm talking about things like breakable crust, heavy upside down snow, wind drifted snow, and so forth. It doesn't have to look pretty. You just have to know that you can get down it safely. And, on these traverses, if we have to wait for somebody for 5 or 10 minutes to get down a tricky section, that's really not a deal breaker. It's not a big deal, but it does have to be done safely, even if it means a bit of survival skiing. By survival skiing, I mean things like sidestepping, snow plowing, kick turns. And these are things that we can also coach you through during the trip. You don't have to be linking always perfect little turns with a heavy pack on difficult snow. And you have to have a good level of fitness. So as a reference, if you can run 10 kilometers in 60, 70, 80 minutes, then you're probably going to be in good shape. If you're not into running, if maybe your knees or hips aren't up for running anymore, if you're able to do 10-kilometer hike in hilly terrain with a heavy backpack, then you're looking good. So a lot of people also ask me about technical skills. They say, I don't have any experience with glacier travel. Well, that's okay. I would say that the most important technical skill is proficiency with transitions. So transitions means taking your skins off, putting them back on. And surprisingly, this can take people, George remembers this, I'm sure, it can take some people quite a long time to figure out how to rip those skins off and put them back on. But that's something, fortunately, you can actually practice in your living room at home. Come up with a routine, a systematic way of doing that, and you'll be good. And we can give you coaching for this during the trip. As for the glacier travel, well, it doesn't require any sort of strong technical skills, but we do ask you that you just learn how to tie a figure 8 on a bite. That's something you can Google, very simple knot to do. And that'll just help you, especially on the first day when we jump on the glaciers. You won't have to learn that on the spot in the wind and in the snow. I've had questions about crampons. We do need to bring ski crampons for these trips. I would say we only use them, one time out of 10 on these trips. But when you need them, you really need them. So it's kind of like bringing a first aid kit. You hope you won't need it, but if you do need it, you need to have it. Again, you develop some proficiency with how your ski crampons go on and off your skis, and that will make things easier. Boot crampons and ice axes are not required for Canadian powder skiing trips. The guides will have along a pair of boot crampons as well as an ice axe in case it's essential for certain tricky sections, but you don't have to bring those. Next up is clothing and equipment for a day of ski touring. So here I've got a photo of what I would carry for a typical day trip. And then the sidebar here, I have kind of miscellaneous items that we'll need for our traverses. So you'll need to have a sleeping bag. It doesn't have to be a warm sleeping bag. Anywhere from -5 to 0 Celsius or 32 Fahrenheit is adequate. If you sleep cold, then you can always slide a hot water bottle into your sleeping bag and be nice and toasty. So save yourself some weight in the pack and bring a lightweight sleeping bag. Toiletries, bring it along, just a very light toiletries kit with the bare essentials. Don't bring a razor if you don't absolutely need it. Don't bring deodorant unless you absolutely need it, but certainly bring a toothbrush, toothpaste, essential personal medications. I asked that people bring along a personal first aid kit, so this should be something small. The main purpose of this would be including blister supplies, especially if you're prone to getting blisters. So moleskin, different tapes, and if you've got questions about that, I'm happy to help you assemble a good first aid kit. Cameras and phones, definitely bring something to take pictures with, but just be aware that there's no cell reception. So if you do need to communicate with home during the trip, it'd be good to bring something like an inReach. Otherwise, let us know. There's always a way to send a message home during these trips if necessary. It's great to bring along something to read or an iPod with some music on it, something nice to do in the evenings when you're resting. Toilet paper is not supplied in the Alpine Club huts. That's something that everybody has to bring for the rest for their own use. So bring a roll of toilet paper or you'll be using the snow. Bring along some lightweight booties or sandals. Those are really nice for wearing around the huts in the evenings, especially if the floors get damp. Bring along a sun hat, like a ball cap for sunny days. And I've been talking a lot about alpine touring skis, but certainly split boards and telemark skis are totally fine as well. They work great on these traverses. Getting the specifics of the skis, of the ski gear. Lightweight ski helmets are standard these days. Please consider bringing along a ski helmet. Some sort of lightweight boots with tech inserts and high quality liners. A lot of people show up with heavy kind of resort oriented boots. Those are going to really make life a bit more difficult, weigh you down, and also won't be very comfortable. Be sure that you get your boots boot fitted professionally and that you've worn them a few times. Even if you just wear them to the hill or wear them for a short hike around your neighborhood, make sure that you've got some experience in those boots so you know if they give you hot spots or pressure points. I would say of all the gear, boots are the most important. If your boots aren't working for you, it's going to be a tough trip. Then as far as clothing, just the standard stuff. You want a Gore-Tex shell, which means rainproof, but breathable. You want a soft shell jacket. What's a soft shell jacket? It's a windproof, but highly breathable and not particularly rainproof jacket. You want to bring along soft shell pants, long underwears, preferably a merino wool type long underwear or synthetic. Some sort of a medium weight fleece, a lightweight fleece in addition especially if you're coming on our February trip to add to the warmth. Some kind of a light windbreaker, a puff jacket. It doesn't have to be like a Denali or Himalayan type down jacket, but just something kind of for midwinter use, but not too heavy. And 2 pairs or 3 pairs of wool ski socks should do the job. Next is a backpack. It should be a kind of a medium to large size pack. I bring a 75-liter pack, but that's usually because I'm carrying a little bit extra stuff. If you're on the smaller side, 45 liters should do it. 60-liter would give you lots of room. Just be sure at home as you're packing things up, be sure that you've got room for another couple of kilograms of food and some group gear. Otherwise, you'll have to strap it on the outside, which is never convenient. And make sure that everything fits inside your pack. A lot of people show up and they've got their shovels tied on the outside or their water bottles dangling. We want everything inside the pack if possible. It keeps it much more secure and protected from the elements. Little odds and ends, ski goggles, sunglasses, a face buff, toque is what we in Canada we call a woolly cap, thermos, plus a water bottle that combined give you about 2 liters of fluid capacity. Some kind of a lunch container, whether it be a stuff sack or a hard-shelled plastic case for your lunch. Ski straps, that's especially handy for securing your skis to your pack if we have to do some boot packing for some of our ski mountaineering objectives. Sunscreen, lip balm, and a headlamp. Avi gear, be sure you have a probe, at least 240 centimeters long, not the ultralight ski mountaineer skimo racing version, but an actual burly heavy duty probe, please. A digital beacon, a modern digital beacon, and a decent high quality shovel. Also be sure to bring ski crampons and that are fitted for your bindings. If you don't have ski crampons fitted for your bindings, I actually have a lot of loaners that I'm happy to lend out free of charge. Just contact me. I offer those on a first come first serve basis. And an ultralight harness, not your kind of cragging harness that'll get kind of uncomfortable in your pack, but something lightweight. Again, I have quite a few loaners of those, and locking carabiners. I have loaners of those as well. So if you're lacking gear, just let me know. And then finally, skis. If you're a split border or telemark skier, those are kind of a specific type of ski. And I'm sure you've got an idea of what you need for that. But for alpine touring skis, these days, most people have the best time on skis that are pretty wide, between 100 and 115 underfoot. People say, well, can I get by with 65 because it's a spring ski tour? Yeah, you can get by, but unless you're an expert skier, you're going to have a much better time on wider skis. And that includes almost everybody. And I really encourage people these days to get tech bindings for their skis as opposed to the heavier frame bindings. Again, the lightest versions of these tend to be the best. Having brakes, though, is definitely a highly recommended advantage. So, and then your poles should have powder baskets, because usually even well into April or even May, we have deep powder. So you want to have powder baskets in your poles. And skins, I'm a real fan of the mohair skins because they glide really well and they're super light. I'm a fan of the Coltex, Ski Trab, and Pomoka brands. And then physically, so there are a few things you can do to prepare for the trip physically, as I mentioned. The best way, obviously, is to have a winter full of ski touring under your belt with a pack on your back. But that's not really feasible for a lot of people. So if you don't live close to any good options for ski touring, many ski hills will allow you to use to ski tour inbounds, but be sure to check with the resort to see if that's okay. Some resorts, especially on private land, forbid it. Other resorts ask that you check in with the ski patrol to make sure that you're not interfering with operations. If touring isn't possible at all, then just going to the ski hill to log some miles with your ski touring equipment is a good idea. If your skis don't have brakes, make sure you have leashes for the ski resorts especially. And if touring isn't possible at all, or visiting a ski resort isn't possible at all, then some kind of a regular fitness routine, it really is essential if you don't have one already. Running is great, but so is hiking with a heavier pack on. Doing stair intervals, I strongly recommend high intensity training as bang for your buck. My website, actually, sawback.com, has a number of great ideas, including hiring a fitness trainer. The fitness trainer I use myself, she actually has an online service, which, especially during COVID, I used, and I found it to be incredibly beneficial. A fitness trainer is a great way to keep on track with your goals. All right, moving into kind of the some of the details and logistics. Getting there. So getting to the Waputik Icefield, the Calgary airport is really convenient. YYC, it's about a 2-hour drive to the ice fields. I strongly recommend that you rent a car. That's the easiest way to go. That way you can use it for your, if you come a day or two ahead of time to get around and go to the local ski resorts. It's also very convenient for getting to field. But if you don't like that idea, and if you want to use airport shuttle options, that is viable as well. Just contact me for more information to help set you up on getting from Lake Louise to field. Some other logistics. So included in the trip fees, I add a dinner on the night before the trip, as well as a hotel stay. I've just found this is a really great way to informally meet other people in a comfortable environment and get to know everybody, as well as a great opportunity to look through people's gear, talk about any concerns people might have for the trip. It's a really nice way to start the trip. And that's at the Truffle Pigs Lodge in Field, which is a great place, an awesome place to get dinner as well. I mentioned too that porter service is included with the trip fees, and this might seem like an unnecessary luxury, but the food is really heavy, and especially if you're coming directly up from sea level, or if you're not in top shape, carrying an extra 6-7 kilograms of food on your back for that first hump up onto the glacier elevations is a pretty big deal. And I personally really appreciate saving that load off my back. It's really nice to arrive at that first hut with everything waiting for you there. My buddy Neil and his group, they have a business running these porter services, and it's a great service that I try to take advantage of as much as possible. And finally, shuttle driver service. So again, it's one of those luxuries you don't appreciate till you've experienced it. To be able to step out of your car at the start of a long traverse, and then 50 kilometers away to finish the traverse and have your car waiting there is really awesome. Instead of having to spend another hour or two finding your vehicle and bringing it back. It's a great service, and it is included with the trip fees. A couple notes about the flights. So people have asked, when's the latest that they can arrive and when's the earliest that they can depart. So there's kind of the recommended, and then there's the what's possible. So I recommend you arrive the day before. That's so you can acclimate. We are at a higher elevation here. It also gives you baggage time to arrive. And there's lots of great options for skiing in the Bow Valley, places like Lake Louise or Sunshine Village or Norquay. Those are great places to spend a day of skiing, just to kind of shake off the jet lag or just acclimate. However, you can arrive the day of and make it there with good time. So you just have to be sure that you're in field by 6:30 p.m. Even later, if you want to skip the dinner, that is certainly possible. And then flights out again, if you absolutely need to fly out the evening that we finish our trip, that is possible. We tend to get off the Traverse at about 2 or 3 p.m. So if you have an evening or a late night or especially red-eye flight, that is certainly possible. Just contact me with if you've got any questions, contact me and I'll give you some advice on booking flights. So just a quick recap, trip duration, with the Wapta at 5 days of skiing, the Bow-Yoho at 7. I've got 3 different departures in February, March, and April. The price is around 1,700 or 2,170 Canadian per person. We ask for a 50% deposit up front, and the balance is due 3 months in advance of the trip start date, which is actually for this winter's trips is coming up pretty quick. Group size, I cap it at 6 people per guide. So if I have 7 people, that means we have 2 guides. And as I mentioned, included with the trip fees are an experienced certified ACMG ski guide or mountain guide with extensive knowledge of the area. Between 5 and 7, it says 6 here, but between 5 and 7, depending on the trip days of backcountry ski touring. Food for the duration of the tour. Hut accommodation fees as well as backcountry permit fees. Shuttle drivers, porter service, group equipment, hotel stay. I think it's a really good value for once you consider what's all included as well as the loaner equipment. I think it offers very good value for the price. Not included, you do have to bring your own backcountry ski touring equipment, and if you need to rent, I can certainly help you with that. Also transportation to field, Lake Louise at minimum, we can arrange a shuttle to field, but you have to at least make it to Lake Louise. And the vehicles for the shuttle, preferably you bring your own, but we can also work out carpooling arrangements. So the exact dates, February 7th to 13th. This year, we've got 5 spots available. April 9th to 15th, another 5. And March 20th to 25th, we've got 7 spots still available for that. Yeah, that's right. Okay, and from here, it's question and answer session. So Maya, do you have a list of questions for me? Apart from, would you like to join me on one of these ski traverse trips?
Thanks, Tom. Thanks so much for this really informative presentation, and it's really, really inspiring. It looks really beautiful. So thank you a lot for taking your time to share your knowledge and amazing photos of your trips with everyone, and Manrico for sharing your experience adventuring alongside Tom. But before heading to the Q&A, I'd like to thank again Backcountry Skiing Canada for partnering with us and for helping us promoting this great webinar. Okay, so we'll be a little bit overboard with time, but we can take another 15-20 minutes to answer the questions that we have. We have around 15 minutes, 15 questions. So I'll just start from the top. You can stop sharing your screen so everybody can see us full screen. Okay, there we go. We have a question. Is there any issues with snowmobilers trying to use the huts?
Oh, excellent question. That's becoming a growing problem with the commercial backcountry huts in British Columbia, but it will never be a problem with the Wapta huts because they are in these protected national and provincial, well, in this case, these national parks. There's not only that, but it would be very difficult for sleds to get up there. But I've never, in my 30 years of experience with the area, heard of any sledders even trying to get into the national parks of these huts. So the answer to that, and the short answer is no.
Okay, thanks. We have a question from the same person. So is bagging a peak, climbing up, climbing down, a key part of every trip? What if you only want to tour or ski?
So yeah, peak bagging. I would say that on a lot of my trips, the main focus is skiing for the sake of skiing. So if we can, whatever offers the best ski run, that's what we do. If that means going to the summit of a peak, then great. But the Wapta seems to have great skiing right off the peaks, and you tend to actually be able to ski all the way up to the summits of these peaks with maybe some short boot packing. So yeah, each of these trips does include, if conditions allow for it, a lot of peak bagging opportunities. And I would say if your focus is more on peak bagging, then the Bow-Yoho is definitely the trip for you. If your focus is more on traveling and not so much about the peak bagging, then it would be the Wapta. But there should be opportunities to do both on both trips.
Thanks. We had one very similar question that I'm trying to find. Just a second. So it really sounds like these trips are geared towards climbers who can ski versus skiers who only want to ski. So maybe you can actually just a little bit elaborate on these two different types of like skiing versus ski mountaineering and group dynamic also.
That's an interesting question. Manrico, what do you think?
I think it was oriented towards skiing. Yeah, it's a ski trip, not a climbing trip.
Yeah,
I would say that both for the Wapta, which, as I said, I did as a private trip back in 1990, a long time ago, and for the Bow-Yoho. They're ski trips with maybe some climbing if the group's inclined, but these are ski trips.
Yeah, I thought Manrico would be well suited to answer that question because he's both a climber and a skier. And also there's a saying, never ask the guide how the trip went. It's always good to get an idea of how the trip went from the people who were participating in it. I would say that I agree with Manrico. It is more of a skier's trip. However, if you're looking for steep fall line, 3,000-foot ski runs, those are fewer and farther between. They tend to be shorter ski runs with interesting but not super steep or technical peaks. So more of a skier's thing, not so much of a climber's thing, but a skier who's more keen on traveling and experiencing some pretty awesome terrain and also having some great ski runs as a bonus.
Great, thank you for the answer. We have a question. What sorts of weather, avalanche conditions are to be expected if attempting the traverse in the winter?
Yeah, good question. So I've done these traverses as early as October 16th and as late as June 21st. So I've literally done on ski. So I've literally done them in just about every condition. And it really depends. You can have great ski conditions in October. Usually you don't. Usually there's not enough snow. You can have high avalanche hazard in April. You can have super warm weather in January. You can have very cold weather in April. It really does depend. But just to generalize, these traverses are all quite doable in a wide variety of conditions if you really know the route and if you know some of the options. And so there are ways, for example, of getting from Guy Hut to Stanley Mitchell Hut that don't expose you to the same types of avalanche problems. So if you really understand the avalanche problems that you're dealing with, you have options. The exception being, it is very tough to get from Balfour Hut to Scott Duncan Hut when you have certain types of avalanche problems. There are no real great solutions to that.
Great, thanks. And can you tell us also what degree of avalanche knowledge experience is required for joining your trips in February, March, and April?
Yeah, so I would ask if possible for you to get your first recreational avalanche course. In Canada, that's called the AST1, and in the States, it's the ARI one. That's great if you have that. If you don't, that's okay. We'll do a really quick companion rescue scenario at the start of the trip, especially with groups that don't have prior training, so that everybody's up to speed on companion rescues. So the short answer is you don't need any avalanche training, but we do appreciate it if you show up with at least the first level of recreational avalanche training.
Okay, thanks. Okay, we have another great question from Olga. So over the years, have you had situations where people couldn't complete the trip, were really slowing everyone else down because of their fitness? Any details you could share on that?
So I would say in all my years of guiding this trip, I've only had one person who slowed things down a little bit. It happened to be an old friend of mine, and he and I did a lot of big trips together. He used to be a machine, very, very fit, but I guess the years were hard on him, and he just it was a tough week for him. It was a Wapta trip, and so actually the way we made it work, and it worked out very well, was he was just happy to sit down and relax while we did these little side trips on our way from hut to hut. And so that gave him a chance to rest and recuperate. He was never out of sight of us. These were safe locations where he was situated, so we just bundled him up, gave him warm down jacket, and he was able to make it work that way. And at the end of the trip, he resolved to never show up for one of these trips again, lacking the fitness. I guess I was a bit blindsided by that because I remembered him as being superhuman. Typically, with clients that I've not skied with before, there's a vetting process where I try to get a really good idea of what their experience and fitness is, so that this sort of thing doesn't happen.
Great, thank you. Jim is asking us what is meant by transitions. You were saying during your presentation, how is one moving on travel days? Snowshoes, crampons?
Sorry, I missed that last part, Maya.
Jim is asking, how is one moving on travel days? Snowshoes, crampons?
Okay, so travel days, those are on skis. We don't travel on snowshoes or crampons for these trips. So the skis slide really well. They're the best way of traveling around the mountains in the wintertime, hands down. It sounds like the person who asked the question must be quite new to ski touring, which is great. This sort of a trip is perfect for them. Ski touring equipment basically allows you. So transition is where you're switching from walk mode to skiing mode. So if you're walking, you're either walking flat or you're going uphill, or maybe you're going for a very gentle downhill. And you've got skins on your skis. Those allow you to make your way up the hill. The down, you need to remove your skins. You need to lock your heels with alpine touring skis, or make a couple of adjustments with split boards or telemark skis. And then suddenly you have equipment that's meant for going downhill as opposed to uphill. So the transition from downhill to uphill, from uphill to downhill, that's what we call transitions. And it involves making some adjustments to your boots and your sliding gear, and it involves removing and adding skins. Hope that answers the question.
Thanks, Tom. Is there a large amount of roped travel across the glaciers?
Yeah, I would say that there's quite a bit of roped travel. Whenever we're traveling with skins on, we most often put ropes on. It's the Rockies, so we have a slightly thinner snowpack. We still have fairly serious crevasse hazards in spots. So especially when we're going through ice falls or broken areas, that's where we throw on the ropes. There's certain criteria that the snowpack has to be fairly strong, it has to be fairly deep, you have to have good visibility before you consider taking the rope off. For downhill ski runs, 99% of the time it's with no ropes.
Okay, Karlik is asking also, do you need any glacier travel courses to visit any of these huts?
So if you're on a guided trip, the answer is no. The guide is responsible for all that sort of stuff. If you are going up there unguided, then you have to have quite a deep knowledge of alpine glacier travel, ski touring, avalanche hazard, crevasse hazard, serac hazard, and so forth.
Can I chime in here as one who's done lots of unguided trips? You can do these trips unguided, of course. Lots of people do, but you would not do them as a beginner. You'd get yourself into deep trouble if you tried that.
Thanks, Manrico.
Thanks. That's really great advice. Okay, a question that's basically related to your trips. Can you accommodate a plant-based diet?
Yeah, the answer to that is yes. So I typically have a professional prepare our food, and she is happy to. Well, I shouldn't say happy. She accommodates all food requirements for anything beyond vegetarian. So if you're a strict vegan, or if you have very complex food requirements, there is an additional fee, and it's fairly modest. It tends to be in the $75 to $100 range for a week-long trip. And that's simply because it does take her a lot of extra time, especially if she has to pack a completely separate, menu for one person. That's $100 doesn't even probably cover it, but it's a service that she does provide.
Great, thanks, Tom. How bad the conditions need to be for the trip to be cancelled, or to have to spend another night in a hut instead of traversing?
So I've never had to cancel a trip. However, it isn't unheard of. It does happen. There have been a couple of situations where I have decided to stay an extra night in a hut. And I always bring, these days, I always bring along a sat phone to coordinate those sorts of logistics. That does happen very occasionally. And in fact, I think it happened with Manrico's group, possibly. Did we spend, anyhow, no, okay. It was, there was one situation where we were going to spend one night in Guy Hut and then continue on to Stanley Mitchell Hut and spend 3 nights in Stanley Mitchell. And to do that trip, you need to go up and over isolated col. And there'd just been a big storm. And I wasn't happy with going over isolated col that day. And meanwhile, we had great skiing out of the Guy Hut. So I just spent an extra night in the Guy Hut, and that worked out really great. Another guided group did continue on to Stanley Mitchell Hut that day, but they had to go through a low route that was very challenging. It took them twice as long as the normal way. So I felt like we made a good call that day. They were in a bit more of a rush because they had run out of food. They needed to make it to Stanley Mitchell to get their food cache.
Okay, thanks, Tom. I think we can wrap this up with one more question. So Jim is asking, none of these photos that you show should suggest any issues about beating the heat. Can you elaborate? This was actually a question during your presentation. So if you...
Yeah, so beating the heat, especially in April, you can have daytime highs of 8 or 10 degrees, and you can have very intense sun. You know, earlier in the season, in January and February, the sun never really packs a punch. But once you get into later in March, April, May, the sun really heats up the snowpack. And so one of the signs of increasing avalanche hazard is actually rapid heating. And so many avalanche problems in the springtime only start once you have that rapid heating kicking in. So if you can get through those areas where those avalanche problems exist before the heat starts, then you can do it very safely. And especially with the exits, not so much out of Stanley Mitchell you can do in any condition, but out of Neil Colgan Hut to get down to the road, you do have to cross quite a few east and south facing slopes, as well as very low elevation slopes. So I've done that trip a couple times late season, like end of May and into June, and you really want to get those as early as possible on certain days. So that's what I mean by beating the heat. It sometimes means waking up at 4 in the morning and getting out the door by 6, and then getting through all your difficult, sun exposed or heat exposed sections by 10 or 11 in the morning. Fortunately, on this trip, we don't have a lot of that. It tends to be the very last day of the Wapta. I've done the Wapta and Bow-Yoho trips in April and May. Once you get up on the glaciers, you have long, beautiful days that we don't really have to worry about the heat kicking in and affecting the avalanche problems.
Thanks, Tom, for elaborating that. We have one more question from Kirby. So this seemed like a great question for beginners, and since I do believe that we have quite a few beginners here. So do you have any advice advice for adventurous backcountry skiing who has done some very light touring and want to do more?
Well, the very first thing would be to take an introductory avalanche course. So in Canada, that would be the AST1. In the States, would be the ARE1. The great thing about these courses is that they teach you the fundamentals, the kind of the bare minimum of avalanche safety, so specifically companion rescue. But they also give you an opportunity to see what a professional who knows an awful lot about ski touring has to offer. So lots of different tips on transitions, on how to pack your pack, on the types of gear to buy. You know, I'll often get people who apologize. They show up and they're like, "Yeah, I'm really sorry. I just don't know much about the ski touring thing. It's the first time I've ever ski toured." I'm like, "That's perfect. This is the exact course you should be taking. You should be showing up with rental gear or borrowed gear and knowing nothing, because this is the correct time to be learning that kind of stuff. And after this course, you can buy the right skis, you can buy the right avalanche beacon, the right probe, all the right gear, and not make those kind of early mistakes by guessing. Manrico, yes.
Yeah, I'll chime in here too. Another great way to learn is join a club.
Yes.
Join a club like the Alpine Club of Canada. That's frankly how I learned. That's how I've met my wife. I met my wife on a rock climbing trip through the Alpine Club of Canada, and so joining the club, go out on weekend trips with them, which are organized by volunteers, members, and just go out and make some turns. That's the way to do it, as well as taking the courses as Tom recommended.
Yeah, those are the two broad categories, I'd say. It's tough to find friends to get out with, and hiring a guide to do all your trips gets expensive. So, the Alpine Club of Canada, and I know there's lots of different clubs in the States, as well as other clubs in Canada. They offer great opportunities to network and find other buddies to get out with. So, as a guide, I obviously have a bias, but I agree with Manrico. It's good to mix it up. Take the odd course, get out there, make your own decisions within the realm of your scope of experience and risk tolerance.
Thank you so much, Manrico and Tomas. This is a perfect way to end this webinar as well. So thank you so much to everybody who participated today. I really hope that you learned a lot from Tom and Manrico. And thank you everyone who joined today. Thank you to our partner Backcountry Ski Canada for partnering us and promoting this trip. And like Tom already mentioned, so this trip, the Bow-Yoho and Wapta traverses are happening in February, March, and April. If you want to talk with Tom more, if there is more questions that you want to get answered, just send us an email at info57hours.com and we'll connect you straight away with Tom. So, Tom and Manrico, any last words for the last attendees?
Well, thank you so much, Maya, for facilitating this again. It's always a pleasure to work with you. Thanks to 57 Hours and Backcountry Skiing Canada for sponsoring this kind of thing. And thank you, Manrico, for showing up and for all your great ideas and suggestions and a kind of a unique perspective on what it's like to be part of a guided trip. Appreciate it.
Thanks for inviting me. Happy to help.
Okay. Thank you so much. Have a great day, everyone.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.